So we'll talk about now, in PHP, we have the ability to create a function. So I'll just start an example of a real simple PHP page. Suppose we had this page. This is a really simple page. It's no colors, nothing fancy is going on here. We're just saying in a PHP section, we're saying print, and then we're putting a string that says h1, which is hypertext, the biggest hypertext. And we're saying hello without a function. So basically we're just saying a sentence. And if we were to look at this page, for some reason we wanted to have a page like that, it would come out like this, hello without a function. If we wanted to, this might seem strange, but we could have done the same thing with a function. So here, this is a page where we're now defining a function. We're making a function called f. You know, like in algebra, you always use f, the first letter of the word function. So we make a function called f, and then the open paren and the closed paren, functions have the ability, you could pass information into it, and then it could perform some task with the information you've given. But right here, we don't have any information to give it. So, but like later on, we might have a function like get password from the database, but we have to give it a user ID. So we might pass in a user ID and it will return to us a password. But right now we're passing in nothing. So the open paren, closed paren is just, we're giving this function no information. So what does this function do? Well, it prints the sentence, hello, from a function. And then it stops, and then right below that we actually call the function. We say, you know, perform your task. So this will print out the same page, you know, the same concept. If I go to here, this is the hello function. So it prints hello from a function. But what it was doing was this. First we defined a function. That doesn't mean the function runs, we're just defining it. And then later on we actually asked it to run. I could ask it to run 4 times if I wanted to. I could go like this now. I could say copy, paste. I'm not really indented, but let me close this just to make it not so distracting. But now it'll say it 4 times, because basically I defined the function once. So the function is just a task that says, it prints out hello from a function. And now I've decided to call the function 4 times. So if I save this, it should print out the page 4 times. I reload. So now it's at it 4 times. So the idea I want to focus on is, we may find ourselves having to do a task many times throughout our website. So it might be good to define the task once in one location, and then just call it by its name, whatever name we make up for it. Okay, but now here's another kind of, you know, an important concept was, would you think that the function definition and then the use of the function, would you think they would have to be in the same file? Or
not if the definition of the function has already been run at some point.
so if somehow it was known, well, let me ask a different question. Would there be an advantage to being able to put the function in one file and call it from, being able to call it from a different file?
Yeah.
That would be great, because we can, for our entire website, we could define it once, and then 50 different files would be able to call it. But now the question is, how would the file, because every PHP file is really a web page, right? It just happens to have PHP blocks in it, added to the HTML. But how would it know where the file, the function is actually living in is? But it would be great if we could do this. So, would you have any suggestions? How would you say, like, this web page is calling a function that's in another file? Because remember, when we go to get a web page, we go out to a web server, we grab a PHP page, it comes back to us and we look at it. But now it's going to somehow say, by the way, I'm referring to a function that's in a different file, so you'll have to go get that file too.
If you had a standard way of naming the default file that has those definitions in it,
Okay, so yeah, one thing would be like if there was a standard, here's where all the PHP functions are, then we could put them all in one file. Yeah, so that would work, like, and every web browser would know, always grab, whenever you go out to get a PHP file, always grab the associated function file. That would be good, but then if we wanted to break down stuff, like maybe we want all our database functions in one file and all our display functions in a different file.
Okay, then you'd have to have a statement at the beginning of the page. Well, you'd need a statement for each function. If they're going to be different on different files, you're going to have it defined in each function when you have it run to say it's in this particular page.
Okay, or like you were saying though, if there was a file that had maybe 4 or 5 functions that we used in this page, then we could just get that by its name.
Yeah.
But we'd have to say it where? Say it in this file. Is that what you?
Yes.
I think that's what you were about to say.
Yeah.
So yeah, so what we can do is we can have a file like this, oh no, sorry, a file like this, where we just define the function. So all I'm doing now in this next example is I'm taking this file. This is the one where we not only defined the function, but we actually invoked it. I'm taking that and splitting it into 2 files. I'm putting the file definition in one file and the invoking of it in another file. So we define the function here. So this is going to be like a file called like hello functions, and then we could add a bunch of hello related functions to it if we want. So all I'm doing here is defining it. I'm just saying within a PHP block, I'm saying there's a function called f, and it prints out hello from, and now it's an included function. But now, because we're in a different file, if we want to use it, you have to somehow, this is the file that's going to display it, we have to somehow tell it where the other file is. So we're going to use the keyword called include in PHP, and we're going to say include and then give the name of the file that has the function in it. So this will display, this is the included version. So this is hello from an included file. So if I went and, let's say, call this one 2 times, and hit save. So all this file is doing is saying include this other file, which has the function definition, and then call the function 2 times. So I do that and reload this page. Now it's been called 2 times. So yeah, so it's not only, obviously it's a good thing that we have this idea of a function. In case we have a task that we're going to do like many times, it would be nice to define it once. And all we really have to do is put a word function in front of it, give it some name, a random name, and then in parentheses describe all the steps of the task. And then once we've defined that, we can then use it all over the place. So an example would be, let's say we were, so instead of having a silly example like, you know, the printing out hello, what we can do is we could look at, let's say we had a website that, well, so here's one thing. Now, depending on, you know, if you went and worked at a startup company, an internet startup company, they may have in their website, so we have like an index.php, it's the first page you see, they might have a folder that's filled with functions that are used throughout your whole website. So maybe I'm just making up a name, PHP function. So we can have a folder called PHP Functions, and then maybe in there they want to break it down even further. They might have some basic functions, some database related functions. So as an example of a function we might have in a database is when we log into a database, we have to log in with a username and a password, and the database will reply, you know, correct or not. Then we might want to issue SQL statements, and we'll get the results back. That we might want to turn that into a function. We might want to take a function that disconnects from the database. Even though in PHP that's one line, it's just close, right? We just say close and we disconnect from the database. Suppose later on they change the way you disconnect, or there's 2 different ways to disconnect. It might be nice for us to have a function that just says disconnect from database, which only does a close, but then that way our web pages won't have to change if close ever changes. So I'll just go over some examples of functions that might show up all over a website. So this is really where we're looking at okay. So for example, let's say site-related functions might be something like, so for example, when we're building our website, let's say you're building it at home on your computer using the XAMPP, like you have your PHP and your data, MySQL, and you're developing your website on your PC at home. When you finally like it and you want to switch over to some service like GoDaddy to host it live, you might find that when you're developing it, a lot of times dev is for development and prod is for production level. We might say, oh, well, here's the database I'm going to use. Like the database server, if I'm in development mode, I'm going to use the one on my PC or the one here at the college. But when I go to production mode, this is like a typical GoDaddy name of their database server. They would give you their database server to use. And maybe in production, in development, your root is the name of your password, but in production it'll be like some other name. So you could write it out this way, and then include this file, which is called siteconfiguration.php. Include this in all of your, pretty much all of your PHP pages. So that way, if you ever need to log into the database, you'll have the database server's name, the database user's name, the database password's name, the name of the database itself. And then if you ever wanted to refer to the beginning of your website, you would say, well, my root, the site root would be like, here's the school server, and then maybe here's when you eventually turn it into a real website. So as you're copying all the files over, the only thing you'd have to do is change this top function, which says get environment. We would change that to return prod, meaning production. And then all of the passwords would switch to the production one. So now instead of like having coded into each of our pages, the username is this, the database name is this, the password name is this, we would say the username is get username, get database user, get password. We would go and fill in those variables. Let me see if I have an example like that. Which one of these goes into the database? So here's now at the top of, pretty much the top of my page, I'm saying include PHP functions. So that's including a file that's going to then, I'll bring that page up. Include PHP functions is so what I'm doing here is I'm saying I'm including a file, and all that file is doing is including more files. So I would build a list in, so maybe now for every folder in my website, I would have one file called PHP Functions.php. And then in there, I would list all the different types of functions I'm going to be needing for this folder. Put that in another include statement. So it's all these include stuff just so we can basically get access to all the functions we need within our site. So let me see, find another interesting example. So for our front page, the front page of our website, the very first line now is going to be include PHP functions. Now, for example, you know how this part, the title, there's the part in the HTML that's the title. That's the part, when you have like multiple windows up on your PC, on the little tab, it gives that name. So let's say we wanted to do, we wanted our website to be a website, we want to build a website for a brass band, right? If we typed in brass band right here, then started making copies of that 50 different times, and then we decided, let's change the name of the band. We'd have to change it 50 times. But now what we could do is we can instead put a function in here called site title. We'll call the site title function. And then the site title function is probably, the reason we have access to the site title function is we've included PHP Functions. So PHP Functions, PHP Functions. The PHP Functions would include siteconfig.php, basic functions PHP, login functions PHP, and database functions PHP. But under, it looks like it'll be under the site one. So if we went to PHP Functions site config, somewhere in here is the site title. So actually, I'm now mixing two different databases together, but we have a function here called site title. So while we're playing around with it in development, we might call it dev, brass band, and then when it goes live, it would be brass band. Now, if every one of our pages put in the title section, it made a call to this function. Let's say we had 50 different pages. Instead of saying brass band, we would say site title, and then in site title we would say brass band. If we decided to change it, we just make the one change right here, hit save, and all 50 pages will pick that up the next time through.
So it really makes sense to do that for every repeated element that isn't part of your template for the page.
Yeah. So like I say, the reason I wanted to talk about this kind of early in our project is what we're going to end up doing is pretty much making functions of pretty much every task we do, just in anticipation we might do it again. So, so other examples might be basic database tasks. So now, if you want, instead of like we did last class where we went to log into the database, we had one line that said database server is this value, database user ID is this value, database password is this value, database name is this value. Then we did MySQL connect. We would connect to the database. It would reply to us, either password is good or bad. And then if it connected okay, we would then select the database we want to read and write from. So that was a task. That was actually these lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there were 6 steps. Every time we go to log into the database, we'd always have to do those 6 steps. We'd have to get the server, the password, the user, the database name. Then we would actually connect to the database through the internet. If the connection was okay, we would then tell it which database we want to talk to. And then we can start issuing SQL statements. Well, since we're going to be doing those 6 steps a lot, why don't we make one function called login database? We'll give it a meaningful name. Put the 6 steps there, and now anytime we want to log into the database, we just say login database, and it'll do all 6 steps. Then when we want to submit an SQL statement, we don't know how many, we might want to log into the database once, issue 4 SQL statements, and then disconnect, or 6, or 12, we don't know. So we'll make that a separate step. We'll say submit an SQL statement. So we pass in a parameter, we give it the SQL statement we'd like to submit, and then we say, let's see, this was an issue where I had GoDaddy handles slashes differently than my PC at home. So I said if it was production mode, I had to replace all the slashes with quotes or something like that. So this was one of those things where it worked one way at home and one way on GoDaddy. And then I got the new SQL statement. And all I would do is I would submit whatever statement came in, I would submit that, and then return the result back. And then when I was done, now this almost looks like a wasted step, because to disconnect from a database in PHP, you say MySQL_close, and you disconnect it. Now I've created a function, log_off database, which has one command. It's almost like it's pointless. I can almost just do a close. But like I say, maybe one day in the future, MySQL might have some new thing where you can, instead of closing, you could, I don't know, close temporarily for 10 minutes or go to sleep for 10 minutes, and if then you don't come back, they would close you out. So if we made our code say log_off database, then whatever changes we wanted to, we could just put in here. Let's see, I have a submit. statement. One of these was not based on whether it's production or development mode. So there's two different ways I could submit statements. So if I wanted to do a log, let me see if I have an example that calls these functions. It'll be under a folder called login. So one second. It would be okay, so here's an example. This is actually before it's using the functions. But here's an example where I'm not using the submit SQL one, but I am using the function here, login database. So that's doing the 6 steps necessary to log into the database. Once I'm logged in, I actually build an SQL statement that would actually check the password of the user ID that I'm passing in. And then I would use the submit SQL statement and I'd pass in the SQL statement that I just built. I'd pass that in, it would then send it off to the database. And then I would record the information that came back from the database and then I would log off the database. So what this function call right here does is essentially it closes. It does the MySQL underscore close and has this disconnect from the database. So what we'll end up doing is, it's kind of a common thing, at the top of all of our files now, we'll do an include of PHP functions. That'll be a file inside that individual folder. We'll have one for every folder. And then that file will then go and, for that folder, we'll go and ask for all the functions that we need, which could be scattered throughout our website. And then that way we'll always be able to have access to every function we need for that folder. And so what we're really trying to do is abstract out all the tasks we're going to do into a separate function. It'll end up making our lives a lot easier down the road.
Does it read all those functions when you go to the home page of the site, or does it just know where to refer to them anytime they need to run?
I think I know what you mean. So you're saying if we went to the beginning of the site, if we went to this page, which is my home page for my functions demonstration, this page is this one. And okay, so the very first line of this, so this page that we're looking at, it's the very first thing it did is it included a file called PHP Function, which then includes other function files. So are all of these files like being brought in with it, or are they being brought in as needed?
Yeah,
So,
that's more or less what I'm asking.
yeah.
Does it read all those functions first, or does it just now know, okay, anytime a PHP function comes up?
I'll check this path to see if it's possible there. It would read them all, and the reason I know that's true is if you had, let's say that PHP functions.php file, which, the pattern I'm using here, not that you have to do this, every folder is going to have a file in it called PHP Functions. So it's including this file. So the index file includes this file, and then this file includes 5 other files. So now we'll like have this whole big collection of functions. If it turns out that in 2 of these different files, like have database functions, display functions, so that's if we want to print out tables on the website, we can make one nice display function, then it'll all show up all over our website. If 2 functions had the same exact name, then it would be ambiguous which one you're using, and immediately you would get an error. So it actually brings in all the files. Just because you're just trying to get one file over, one PHP file, it's going to bring in all the ones you include. So we don't want to get crazy with the including, because it all comes with us. It'll slow down the website slightly. But, and we also, when we make up function names, we don't want to have vague names like, get stuff. And then get stuff shows up in 4 different files, and then we get an error because we have a name repeat.
So each function must have a unique name, no matter where it is.
Right. Well, if they ever both get included into the same page, there would be a conflict if they had a matching name.
Do you diagram the functions before you really get too terribly far in designing your website? I mean, should we be doing that now? Kind of determining what functions we're going to need?
Well, the one, like I say, this is just a design choice I made. I mean, I copied it from a small website company I used to work for. But we could just make one big file for every function we'll ever need. Like we could just make one file called functions and just put everything in there. But sometimes it's good to, if your company gets big enough, like you have a database team and you have a web team, the display team, like separate teams, it might be good that they have their own file. So you could have a database functions file. Like the way I'm doing it here, we don't have to do it this way. So I don't know if this could make it more confusing because we're including one file that's then including 5 other files. But you were saying did you want to map them out?
Yeah, would you want to determine what functions you're going to need before you get too far along in designing your site?
But I mean, yeah,
What do you
we
do
could
first
at the
to
beginning,
create?
like obviously basic stuff like logging into the database, asking it questions, logging out. It would be nice to have that as a function. We wouldn't want to do that 100 different times. And then there's just one example. The MySQL people, I don't know, maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, they came up with a better way to connect to a database and disconnect, and they changed it from, I think it was MySQL_connect to MySQL_I. They put an I, meaning it's a newer version, and then connect. So they changed all their functions, made them newer and improved. And if you did it the old way, if you created a website 6 years ago, the old way, and you connected without using a function, if you just connected on your own in 100 different pages, you'd have to go and make 100 different changes. And if you only made 98, you'd miss 2 of them. That'd be a problem. But if you made a function called connect to database that had the 6 steps there, you just change it once and they all change. Will change with you. So, I mean, it would be kind of tough for us to anticipate every function we'll ever need for the website, but it would be good to kind of get a good bucket. And then just as we need one, it's actually going to make writing the PHP code a lot simpler, because suppose right now you didn't know how to connect to the database, you didn't know how to issue an SQL statement, you didn't know how to disconnect. We can now actually write a function called connect to database, submit SQL, disconnect from database, and then figure out the function later. But it's going to make us actually, our PHP code is going to be a lot quicker, because we'll just be putting down function names and then deal with creating the functions a little bit later. But so we could try to get most of the functions we anticipate for our site, but we're going to have a few more that'll just pop up as we're creating the site. So like for our band members, if they were kind of odd, maybe some band member might play multiple instruments. So we might make a function called get musician's instrument. Would that make sense? Something like that.
I can't imagine needing it, but yes, I mean, someone might want a list of just the chord players, for example.
Okay, but then let's say later on we realize, some musicians play multiple instruments. Now we'd have to come up with another function called get multiple instruments for a band member. So it could return multiple instruments, but So we don't have to get every function down at the beginning, but it'll be good to get the basic ones down. And then just as we need them, we would know where, hopefully based on all the names of the functions, we would know where to put them. But yeah, it's gonna make like if you're comfortable with this concept, I think it makes the website a little bit easier. It's just that when you're maybe debugging something, you're looking at your code and your code's referencing another file, which references another file. It takes a little time to chase where it's coming from, but then that's what it'll be to debug it. But once you get the function working once, you just say its name and the task should work fine. Makes it a lot less error prone once you get it set up.